Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Switch Statement Podcast. It's a podcast for investigations into miscellaneous tech topics.
Today is Show and Tell, and we're talking about Catala. Will it revolutionize our legal system?
Hey, John, how are you doing?
Hey, Matt, I'm doing pretty well. How are you doing?
I am doing okay. I'm at the tail end of my latest incarnation of COVID, so hopefully I don't sound too terrible.
You sound great.
Listeners will just have to put up with it.
I think your voice has an added complexity and graveliness because of the COVID.
All right. I'll see if I can get infected every episode with COVID.
Yeah, just before. Just spend the week in misery so that our podcast is good.
I mean, I do feel like you need to be miserable to appreciate the good things in life.
Agree.
So.
Yeah, we all need like a dopamine detox or whatever that's called because everyone just
dopamine
lives...
fasting.
Yeah, totally.
But, well, that does not really relate at all to what I am bringing to this show and tell. So, have you ever broken a law?
Oh, all the time. I hate laws.
Nice.
I'm a spirit of the law person. I talk to my wife about this all the time.
I've heard you say that before, but I feel like that's always, when you've described it in more detail, you're actually adhering to a greater, like a more pure representation of the law that it would even be. The law would permit you a certain class of action.
Yeah.
But you understand the greater context of the law.
This is the absurd claim I make in any case.
Maybe with this programming language, everyone can understand laws more precisely.
Oh, I'm going to love this topic.
So this is something, and we didn't talk about this on the podcast, but this is something that we talked about on, like, just in the abstract in the past. But there's this programming language called Catala. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. It basically attempts to It attempts to allow you to annotate legal text. So the idea is you would take the text of a law, a statute, you would paste it into your editor, and then you could go in and you can kind of like break out these like concepts and attempt to define them precisely. And in cases where there was a mathematical definition, you could say, oh, this value is defined as being equal to this other value divided by this other value times this other value. And so you can get this very precise, formal, logical, rigorous definition for all of these, all of these laws. So that's kind of that's the point.
Yes, I love this. I believe that this will eventually, maybe not Catala itself, but some form of this will eventually become our legal system. Because to me, it just makes zero sense that we put so much in the hands of fallible humans to like calculate sentencing and to, do even legal arguments feels like something that could be done with like a logical process. And obviously you'd want some human involvement, like that's by design that humans are making judgment calls here and there. But there's so much of our legal system that's just, is this situation similar to this other situation? And therefore the punishment should be the exact same thing. And computers are just better at that type of thing.
It's interesting because I need to spend more time understanding exactly what the point of this is, because what they're very clearly not trying to do is being like, okay, we're going to try to replace this law with this code. But what it seems like they are trying to do is say, here's like a pseudocode representation of what this law actually says, and then a lawyer can read that pseudocode and determine if it aligns with the text of the law. So this is one thing. This is, if there's one criticism I have with the initial documentation of the project, it's that they don't make it really clear how do they see this as being used in the real world.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, yeah, maybe I misunderstood because I would go full bore replace our I mean, this is obviously crazy, but like I would replace our legal system with computer programs ASAP. But this sounds like a more incremental approach, which is probably smart.
Well, so like if you'll allow me to read a snippet of their their README. So they describe Catala as a domain-specific language for deriving faithful by construction algorithms from legislative texts. And if you're not sure what faithful by construction means, I don't know what that means either.
Yeah, it's I'm trying to interpret what that would mean. It sounds like as long as your base principles are set up correctly, like as you're writing new code, it will, sort of be adherent to those principles. I feel like this is so important in the legal system where every new case aligns with all these old precedents. So it almost sounds like something like that, where you establish these rules and you can sort of build on top of them and create a system that's consistent.
Yeah, I think that's essentially what they're getting at. That like this is a logical chain of reasoning that is itself like faithful.
One of the things I love the most about this concept, like having laws represented as algorithms, is you can change them, but still verify that like old cases would produce the same result. It's almost like unit tests where you can sort
Yeah.
of, because these days when the Supreme Court is arguing some big thing, one of their primary concerns is, are we going to introduce some new rule that actually has some horrible side effect that we're not realizing?
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
I think with a system where laws are represented as algorithms, you can verify that you're not going to do that by literally running every case that's ever happened in the history of the United States or whatever country you're dealing with, and just proving that they all have the same outcome.
I think that this is why this is hard because judges are basically tasked with the problem of taking this enormous space of possible, it's like, oh, like, how does the fact that this woman is a single mother with 3 children,
Right.
like, how does that affect what the fair sentence should be? You know, and we basically need these people to be able to handle any possible new, like, novel situation and, like, come out with a reasonable outcome. And so I think that's what would be hard about doing something with a computer. And I guess maybe that's something you would always need a human for is
Right.
like the novel aspect of this.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't want to underplay the importance of the legal profession, understanding the history, understanding the context of the individuals involved, because that would still retain its importance. What I think the programming slash, programming language side of things would help with is those parts of the law that are purely algorithmic. It's purely like, does it match this precedent, that happened 80 years ago that normally some paralegal would have to dig up? Like those sorts of problems that today take a lot of time and resources would just not.
If I'm getting back to my original point, it sounds like this is actually the opposite of what we were talking about. I think that the goal of this is you have a law and
Yeah.
you want to turn it into software. And like you can, in a line by line way, interweave the implementation of an algorithm with the text of the law in a way that a lawyer could say, this code correctly corresponds with the text of this law. It's the opposite thing of what we said. We said we wanted to write the law as
Yes.
code.
Yeah, yeah.
And this is like, oh, this is just making sure that the code is doing what the law said.
Right, right. Which I had just gotten excited because this is a concept that I've thought about many, many times. But yeah, it does sound like this is for a different purpose.
I was right there with you, though, because it would be very cool to have a language that had these core constructs that allowed you to do terms, definitions, and things like that.
Yeah.
And then it could kind of allow you to run these simulations. but I was incorrect. I don't think I had anything else. I'm probably not going to spend more time looking into Catala because this seems more useful for someone who is building a system, like a legal system that needs to, or a system that needs to correspond directly with a law.
Yeah, it's a super interesting concept because, to me, having probably a naive understanding of the legal profession, people in the legal profession are basically programmers. Like they're basically logisticians. And I guess we've discussed this on the podcast before, where you're reading like legal texts and stuff. Mm-hmm. And I think your background in software will help you a great deal, because a lot of times, like, that's kind of, you're just doing a logical chain of reasoning. So I do think it's kind of interesting for a person in the legal profession to think of laws in terms of like coding.
Yeah, at its core, it is all about logic. It is all like you're doing these logical tests. Like they use the term test. And it is funny because I feel like there's so little overlap between like legal and programming. Like this is why I got so excited about this. This is one of the very few cases where it feels like there is some overlap. So that's why I was hoping like, oh, we could express the laws in terms of code.
Yes. Yeah. And I love that you mentioned that there's historically been no overlap, because that's another thing that I've always thought is wrong. You know, it's like there's so many professions, and this is totally a biased point of view because I'm a software engineer, but I feel like there's so many professions that could profit so much with more algorithmic thinking, more technology, more software engineering, like the medical profession, legal profession, all sorts of other ones. And so, yeah, I just like that the world seems to be awakening more and more to that idea as, you know, technology progresses.
Law seems like one that has been very slow to, because like I feel like we hear about, you know, medical scanning and getting ML like worked in there, and law still feels like it's very stuck in this like, you know, wig wearing 1800s. Like they're doing it the same way as they were 100 years ago.
Yeah, GPT-7 is going to have like 50 million times the intelligence of a human, and the legal system will still be like struggling to find legal precedents.
Yeah, exactly. As we were talking, there was this interesting idea that I had. So it's like, or just a conception of being a lawyer, where if you're writing a law, you kind of want to draw this dividing line between people who are following the rules and people who are breaking the rules. And it's like, okay, this is where it's okay and this is where it's not.
Yeah.
But now, if you are defending someone in a lawsuit, there's kind of this flexibility with any words that it's like, oh, okay, well, if you interpret the words in this way, then actually what my client did was completely reasonable. You know, so it's kind of like this reverse, because the first problem that I described, you wanted to draw this line like very precisely. Right. But then the second problem is you want a desired outcome. So you kind of need, in a biased way, to argue that like, oh, well, you know, there's a couple of different ways to interpret these words, and this is the right way. And you need to put the most convincing argument about like why this one particular interpretation is the right one.
Right.
To make that concrete, the most recent example I was thinking about, and I'm not, like, the point of this is not to get into politics, but I was recently listening to a podcast about whether or not, you know, former President Trump should be able to run again based on the 14th Amendment. And the issue at hand was, it says that if you were an officer of the government and you executed an insurrection against the government, you shouldn't be able to hold office anymore. Right?
Yeah. Seems
pretty reasonable. And then the question at hand is the president an officer of the government? And so now, like,
what the hell?
You have to, it sounds, you know, absurd on its face, but it just illustrates that, because the law itself doesn't define what an officer is. And so then now the problem becomes, and this is when you allow all this bias to leak in, is like, well, when there is this ambiguity, depending on what your preconceived ideas about what should happen The president will obviously be an officer or not be an officer. Like in my case, like it seems pretty obvious that the president would be an officer of the government.
This is something I've always found so interesting about our legal system is we like to think of it as these sort of sacrosanct modules that are impossible to violate. But in actuality, the way our legal system is carried out in practice, it's just people arguing, and whoever builds a more convincing case that 12 other people agree with wins. And it's been demonstrated so many times that it's manipulatable.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I definitely have a naive view on this sort of stuff, but there's just been so many situations that seem really clear to me that wind up evidently not being clear to the legal system.
Right. Or like just taking up a preposterous amount of the legal system's time and like worry.
Exactly.
All right. Well, I think we can leave it there. So, Catala, if you're writing any legally correlated code, check it out.
Yeah, use Catala. I like this topic. This was fun.
All right. Well, I will see you next time, John.
See you next time.